Alright, I'm going to do a quick little raw, unedited video here. Bridging off my last video. Last video I did was about strength in jiu-jitsu. My experience in my last tournament, where a lot of folks had recognized that I was pretty strong. I wanted to go in depth on that as to why I think that my strength that I've accrued over 15 plus years of working out transferred over to the mats. So if you want to check out that video talks a lot about concepts on how I think people can develop strength for jiu-jitsu. But when I was at the tournament, I had somebody ask the question, what should you lift first before jiu-jitsu? So that was the question. Do you lift first before jiu-jitsu or lift after jiu-jitsu? So there's a lot of elements to that question that could change the answer. As usual with health, fitness, nutrition, the answer is it depends. So I'm going to try to break that down a little bit. I think one of the critical things is, do you want to get strong with your lifts? All right. I think the first thing we have to do with everybody is figure out what your priorities are. And those priorities may be different at different times of the year, depending on what type of athlete you are. If you are a professional jiu-jitsu athlete, or if your number one goal is to perform for jiu-jitsu, your goals are going to change in the gym. Like your performance goals are going to change depending on how far you are out from your tournament and competition. Ideally, you're not going to be able to maintain peak fitness and peak strength all year round. Peak fitness, peak strength are just not sustainable. Okay, that's why you peak out for a tournament. You can periodize everything, you can time everything so that you're peaked in tip-top shape for a tournament. But a lot of times that tip-top shape is just not sustainable. Now, you might say, well, there's people who are in tip-top shape all year. That's true. But they are not in their peak shape, okay? What may be out of shape for someone else is in shape for you. And Lance Armstrong, out of shape, is probably a very in shape and fit person. But he's not peaked all year. He's not able to peak all year. It's just not sustainable. The body can't take it. You'll end up with injury. You'll end up with overtraining. You'll end up with progress that is stagnant, or even worse, declining progress. So you have to peak at different times. So we have to establish what is this person's goal. So let's talk about that. If their goal is strength, okay, we first of all have to define strength. What is strength? Okay, what are we talking about when we say strength? A lot of people say, should I lift before jiu-jitsu or after jiu-jitsu? Well, it depends on what you're lifting for. Are you lifting for muscle, or are you lifting for strength? Sure, sometimes you might be doing both, but if we're trying to be optimal in our training, we're going to pick a path. And so if you're training for strength, then let's go ahead and say let me go ahead and address what I think is optimal no matter what your goal is. For the most part, it would be optimal to have your strength training session separate from your jiu-jitsu session, in my opinion. And with your strength session having 6-8 hours after your strength session before your jiu-jitsu session, and vice versa. After your jiu-jitsu session, having 6 or 8 hours. So ideally, you'd be doing one in the morning, one in the evening type of thing, spaced out about that far out. Now, obviously, sleep is key. So I want to give that caveat that sleep is king. Sleep is the most natural performance enhancer that you can utilize. So sleep is important. So I'm not saying train twice a day at the expense of sleep. I'm just saying that training 2 times a day for not every single day of the week, but splitting up into 2 sessions is probably pretty optimal. Now, obviously you can't do that every single day, so don't think that I mean that. So, optimally you split it up into 2 sessions. But let's say you're unable to. I think if you're unable to split things into 2 sessions, I can give you some concepts that might help guide you in your training. So let's define strength. Okay, strength is typically, when we really talk about strength, top end strength, we're talking about increasing a person's absolute strength, their 1 rep max, or even a little bit of their speed strength, like something like a clean, a snatch, a jerk, something in those realms. We're talking about strength. We're talking about lifting heavy weight, lifting heavy weight, whether it be fast and explosive or slow. We're talking about lifting very heavy weight for 1 rep to, let's say, 3 reps, maybe 5 at maximum. That's going to be strength zone. So if you're lifting for strength, should you lift? If, let's say you have to do your lifting in the same 2-hour span as jiu-jitsu. That's all your schedule will allow. Maybe your jiu-jitsu gym has weights, and so you have to utilize those weights while you're there at the jiu-jitsu gym. All right, so now, if you're lifting for strength, are you going to lift for strength before or after jiu-jitsu? You're going to lift for strength before jiu-jitsu, in my opinion. When you're lifting for strength or training for speed, remember this, for speed or strength or any speed, strength, speed, you're going to want to lift first. You're going to want to lift while you're fresh. It's going to be important to lift while you're not under fatigue. You're going to want to be able to give the max power output, the max strength output that you can possibly give. If your max bench press is 300 pounds and you need to do your sets and reps, say you're doing 250 pounds for 3 sets of 3, you want to be able to explode with that 250 pounds with as much velocity as possible on every single rep. You want to have as much output on every single rep as possible to really maximize on those strength gains, because remember, you're shooting for a strength stimulus. So the signal strength is really more about electricity than it is about muscle. And we'll talk a little bit more about muscle. Muscle plays a part. It definitely plays a part. But that's how you can see people that are really strong, but they're skinny and don't have a lot of muscle. Training in 1 to 3 rep zones doesn't really build a whole ton of muscle. It can. Don't get me wrong. Fast twitch fibers, you can build muscle. But for most people, it doesn't get them as super jacked as bodybuilding style training. And that's just apparent. You can take, So if you're training for raw strength, 1 to 3 reps, you want to lift before jiu-jitsu so that way you're not fatigued. If you're fatigued and now you go to train strength, you're training more like power endurance or strength endurance. You're training something a little bit different. That's not to say it's a bad thing to train. It's just not optimal strength. So the question is, what should I do for optimal strength? You're going to lift before jiu-jitsu. Lifting after jiu-jitsu is just not going to be effective when you're tired and you're unable to lift as much. Now, if for whatever reason, new people, sometimes that doesn't apply. They're able to lift just as much tired as they are not tired, and in that case, it's probably okay. But you also don't want to risk getting injured because you're lifting under fatigue either, so have to be super careful with that. So that's if you're lifting for strength, you want to lift first before jiu-jitsu. Now, if you're lifting for muscle building, if your number one priority is to put on muscle, you weigh 130 pounds and you're trying to get up to 170. Now, if you're lifting for muscle building, which is going to be different than strength. Strength is anywhere between 1 to 3 reps, maybe 1 to 5 reps per set. Muscle building is going to be anywhere between 5 to 30 reps, or 6 to 30 reps, 5 to 30 reps for muscle building. So if your goal is muscle building, you want to put on size, you want to put on muscle, it's going to probably suit you better to lift after jiu-jitsu. And here's why. And you can listen to Andy Galpin on this a little bit more. He knows the science behind it. I'm just going off what researchers like Andy have said. I haven't done the research myself. But you're going to want to lift after. When you lift to build muscle, you're sending a signal to your body. When you're lifting in those high rep zones, you're lifting those hypertrophy zones, those zones for building muscle. You're sending a signal to your body to go into protein synthesis. Okay, so your body's going into protein synthesis, which is going to be a muscle building signal that you're sending your body. You want that signal to be as loud as possible for as long as possible. The problem is when you do cardio, it does interfere with that signal. So after you muscle build, you want to go 6 to 8 to 10 hours without interfering with that muscle building signal. Now again, this is if muscle building is optimal to you. That's not to say that you can't build muscle by doing cardio after. There's plenty of people that build muscle by doing cardio after, doing HIIT training, doing CrossFit, doing whatever. Plenty of people build muscle doing cardio after. We're just talking about what is optimal. Do you want to be optimal in your muscle building? Then you're going to want to do your muscle building training after jiu-jitsu. Send that signal to your body, get your body into protein synthesis, and then stop. Now, that muscle building is going to interfere a little bit with the cardio signal that you're sending your body in jiu-jitsu. Not to say you're not going to build any cardio. Again, it's just going to interfere with it a little bit and might inhibit some of your cardio gains that you're getting from jiu-jitsu by giving that muscle building signal for by lifting after jiu-jitsu. But it's going to be optimal to lift after jiu-jitsu. Now, the same thing going back to lifting for speed. Now, if you're lifting for muscle endurance, it might not matter. If you're lifting for power endurance or strength endurance, the ability to be strong under fatigue, if you're somebody that's already strong and you've got enough top end strength and now you just want to be able to carry on that strength for a long period of time, let's say you're going to do a jiu-jitsu tournament that's going to have a ton of matches over a couple days, you want to be able to really express your strength under fatigue, then you'd be fine to lift after strength training and lift in any manner you want. If you're already strong enough, then it doesn't really matter as much. You can just mix it all together, blend it all together, and if you're not really shooting for anything optimal, you can kind of change your goals based on your competition. You're going to be in a long competition, you're going to be doing a lot of rounds, a lot of matches over several hours, something like that. You can really change your training up. All this stuff that I'm saying wouldn't necessarily potentially matter as much in training close to competition. But outside of competition, obviously, you want to get as strong as possible. Maybe you want to build muscle. Maybe you don't want to build muscle. Maybe you already have too much muscle. You don't want to build muscle. So you're going to want to know how to utilize those strength zones. This same thing is going to apply if you are, no matter if you do jiu-jitsu or not. If you apply the same concept to, a lot of people ask the question, should I lift before cardio or do cardio before lifting? The same exact answers that I gave to jiu-jitsu applies. I'm treating jiu-jitsu as cardio. That's how I'm treating jiu-jitsu. I'm treating jiu-jitsu as cardio. So you can rewatch the whole video, and every time I talk about jiu-jitsu, substitute that out with cardio, and you get the same thing. Now, the only thing with jiu-jitsu is you will have to pay attention to your recovery, because jiu-jitsu can be a strength stimulus. There is some strength aspects to jiu-jitsu. There's a lot of isometric hold. There's some muscle building stuff going on. You can get muscle building rep ranges or time under tension ranges while you're doing jiu-jitsu, so that you can build some muscle while doing jiu-jitsu. You can build some strength in jiu-jitsu. So there is some interference in your recovery there. So you have to be super careful. If you're doing gi jiu-jitsu, your grip, you can fatigue your grip a ton. And then if your grip is completely worn out, you got to be super smart. If you go in the gym and your strength programming has a lot of grip work, but the day before you just toasted your grip in the gi, you're not going to want to repeat and train your grip every single day. You got to be super careful. That's why I think it's important to train gi and no gi. So like one day you can train gi, one day you can train no gi, and switch back and forth each day, so you're not constantly wearing that grip down. In the gym, you might notice if your grip's super worn out, more and more training is not always better. You may have to use grips in the gym. You might feel like, oh man, I don't want people to see me using grips. I look like a wuss. Be smart about your training. If you need to use grips, use grips. Use grips to give your grip a rest for the day while still training your muscles. If my grip's so wore out that I can't do a set of 12 pull-ups and hold on to the bar, well, if I need to get my pull-ups and increase my lat strength and my arm strength, well, I need some grip so I can get that set of pull-ups in, if that makes sense. Same thing with deadlifts. If I can't deadlift, but I'm trying to improve my posterior chain strength, I'm trying to improve the strength of my back and my hamstrings and my legs, well, then I need to use some straps or some grips while I'm deadlifting, so that way I can get stronger on my posterior chain, maybe give my grip a rest. But want to do that quick little video just about Should you lift before or after jiu-jitsu? Hopefully that answered the question for you. There's a lot that I could go into for sure. If you have any questions on the topic, please hit me up in the comments. Hit me up with the question. I would love to do another video on it. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and watching.